Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode where we are going to be taking a look at some of the different types of wands and what types of categories they can be broken down into. One last shout out to Kai Voxender. Again, I am going to be adapting his conventions when it comes to this and when we're taking a look at some of these wands. So I'll leave a link to his channel. You can go check him out. He's a fantastic wand maker. And with that, let's get started. So we're gonna start with what would be considered, I guess, more like traditional wands. They are pretty much primarily made on the lathe. They're not always the most interesting looking. This is kind of just like a tester one that I did on the lathe. When I didn't put any stain on it. I didn't, do anything fancy with it. I didn't carve into it or anything like that. So obviously it's not the most interesting looking, as well as this. I mean, I did some detailing right here. I started to with a little wood iron just to try to give it some, unique character. But traditional wands are pretty much just kind of turned out, quickly on the lathe. They're pretty straight. They don't really have any unique, interesting bends or anything to them. So nothing wrong with them. They can look very sleek and elegant. But generally speaking, so I'm not necessarily drawn to the more traditional, very, very symmetrical looking wands. It just seems a little too easy to me sometimes. Yeah, traditional wand generally falls into that 40 to 60 ratio. Doesn't always have to, I guess, but it has the pommel, the handle, the guard, and they're just kind of, turned out on the lathe. There you go. Traditional style wand. Moving on to more of a conventional wand, which again, also they're generally straight, can lack crazy, interesting shapes or whatever. Harry's wand obviously does have a good amount of detail that's carved into it. But the conventional wands also, again, have the pommel, the handle, the guard, and or faux guard here, and the blade. Again, generally, probably more in the straight category, whereas Professor Slughorn's may deviate a bit from that because of the bend in the blade itself. Little less conventional or traditional, if for no other reason than it's not a totally symmetrical, even blade. Moving into some of the more interesting designs, in my opinion. I didn't realize it when I first sat down to do this, that I don't really have very many that I think fall into the traditional or conventional style. Some could argue that varying degrees, I guess, do, but for the most part, I think most of my designs at least fall into the next category, which is called unconventional wands. Now, most of these will have, bends and or curves. They're harder to distinguish the parts of the wand. For example, the blade, the guard, handle, pommel, and or have abnormal features to them or interesting embellishments and things of that nature. So this wand right here, actually it's sort of a pommel heavy, which is actually the next category. So I will set that one over here for the time being. Here's a good unconventional wand. I turned most of this out on the lathe. Well, not most. The blade right here I turned on the lathe because I wanted the contrast. I wanted that straight blade. And I turned the first, ring or two right here, and I stopped. And this whole thing back here was just like a blocky chunk of wood. that I then took it to the belt sander and using a Dremel carved in the weird little details. Now again, not as easy to distinguish where say like the pommel or guard would be. It all kind of almost like blends into itself, and you do hold it like that. And it does have a back to it. It does have like a pommel of sorts. It's very, well, yeah, I don't know that you could really call that a pommel, but it's definitely unconventional. It has a somewhat traditional blade, or it does have a traditional blade, I guess you could say, but the handle for sure is very unconventional. Let's see. Neville Longbottoms, I think for me falls kind of in that same category. Again, it has a straight blade, which is very traditional, I suppose, or actually more conventional. Yeah, it'd be more conventional because it has the blade. It has kind of like a faux guard right here where they separate the handle from the blade, and then the handle right here. And it's there's not a clear distinction where the pommel is. It all just kind of obviously twists and blends into one, but it is a bit more bulky toward the end. So for that matter, you could argue that is somewhat of a pommel. So I think that it definitely falls within the unconventional category. Unconventional / sort of conventional. I think same with this. Not so clear on what, the separate parts. It's kind of just like handle, right? And then there's the guard here, and then the blade. This would definitely be an unconventional, where all the whole piece back here just twists into the handle, and it has that kind of not as sharp as like Bellatrix, but it has that curved handle here overall. So not something that's just turned out on the lathe, right? Which again, I'm not hating on anyone who turns out work on lathes. I do use a lathe. It's just not as, to me, it's just not as interesting. You've seen hundreds or thousands of different wands that have just been turned out on the lathe, and after a while, they kind of all look sort of similar, in my opinion. Here's another pretty unconventional one. Now, unlike Bellatrix's wand, I wouldn't hold it like this. I would not hold it with the curve down. I actually hold it where the meaty part of my thumb rests right in that curve there. And my thumb fits pretty good there. So it's almost more like not a gun, but definitely unconventional, I'd say. This is sort of again, another Bellatrix type of almost style wand, but so unconventional, has that bend in it. I did burn the wood back here considerably to get what's called like gator skin on it, and then filled the cracks with gold, fake gold. It's resin, but another unconventional. This one will be going up on the shop soon. It isn't up yet, so that's actually the first time I'm sharing it with y'all. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this one, since it's the first time being shown. This, I would say, is definitely unconventional, which kind of takes us right into the next category, and the last category, which is feature heavy. I would call this, I guess, kind of like a handle heavy. The blade up here is pretty short. It's almost like the inverse of what I was talking about earlier, with like the 40 to 60 ratio, where the 60 in this case is the back handle here. And there are tiny brass tubes that are inserted into the handle here. And the blade itself is not 100% smooth. It has little flat cuts on it. So the next category, so there's traditional, conventional, unconventional, and then the last category is feature heavy. It just means that basically the ratios are heavily skewed toward one side or the other. So for example, this wand would be considered pommel heavy. And you wouldn't hold it like this. You could, but it doesn't, I mean, I guess someone could hold it like that and maybe that'd feel okay to them, but certainly to me, that does not feel right. It does not feel comfortable like that. So for me, you hold that right there. And that's where you cast. Wow. So again, the ratios are heavily skewed toward the pommel, right? Almost like it was a caricature of a different, smaller pommeled wand or something that had been exaggerated back here. And then the rest is basically just blade. There's not really much of a guard. I mean, I guess you could try to argue that the second little mushroom right here is a guard of sorts, but not really. Another example of a pommel heavy, as well as like an unconventional, because it's got that bend back here to it, but it's also much more bulbous back here. You could hold it like this, but then with doing that, you're kind of like choking up on the actual blade itself, and there's no real guard there. The faux guard on this one is right about here. It kind of stops. That's just where you separate the two, basically, from the blade and the pommel back here, pommel / handle. But again, I would still palm this one. It's another pommel, just nice and beefy back here. Again, you could hold it here, but something about it just doesn't feel right. The weight just feels off. You'll know. I mean, like if you have some of these and you've been holding them like this, maybe you've already figured out on your own by now that it just didn't feel right. But if you've been holding a pommel heavy higher up and you see this video, go back, and if you have one that is very pommel heavy, put that in the palm of your hand and hold it like this. And I'm telling you right now, it'll feel like it was meant to be all along. That is it for this one. Let me know down below if you have any questions, what you thought of this, if you find it beneficial, if you learned anything, gave you anything to consider moving forward with conceptualizing some of your own designs. So yeah, and if you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe button, click the little bell for future notifications on new videos. And thank you for watching.